on the official Marvel podcast. You've got questions, we've got answers. We are joined by the cast and crew of Marvel Television's Agatha All Along to answer your burning questions from the first 2 episodes.
We've got head writer and executive producer Jack Schaefer and stars Kathryn Hahn, Patti Lupone, and Aubrey Plaza all on the show this week.
It was a complete surprise to me that I would get that phone call, and they described the character, and I thought, okay, this is destiny, really. This is destiny.
Patti, I'm so excited. We are in full spooky season here as we go from witches to vampires with a deep dive on Blade and chat with the author of the upcoming Blade Red Band comic, Bryan Edward Hill.
Blade is going upriver, in quotes, in a war-torn country to go take out a vampire lord dictator who thinks he might become a god.
I'm Preeti Chipper.
And I'm Evan Narcissus.
And this is the official Marvel podcast. Okay, so here on the podcast each week through the end of October, we are playing it safe by giving you 7 days to watch the latest episodes of Agatha All Along before we get into spoilers.
Right. And since it's been a week since the premiere of the series on Disney+, that means we can finally get into it.
Yes! But before we dive in, roll the spoiler warning, please.
Okay, so this first episode, wow. On one hand, there's that sense of a meta narrative around the show, like WandaVision. WandaVision we watched and was like, are they really out here in the suburbs on some, classic mid-century American sitcom stuff? And, you had the inkling that something else was going on. So we definitely get similar vibes here. It really feels like the writers and the producers are messing with us as an audience, right? The tonality of this episode is so different than the last time we saw Kathryn Hahn as Agatha Harkness. And she was kind of in full supervillain witch mode. Here it's this weird, grim, prestige investigative drama. And you really feel okay, they're going to make us keep guessing what reality is here in the same way that they did in WandaVision.
Yeah, that was what was so great about WandaVision, right? Where you went in and you sort of had these moments of this is fun, but I have no idea what's happening. And Agatha bringing that same energy for that first episode. And then again, just throwing you for a loop. I love sitting down and watching a TV show where you're you can have that reaction that what?
Everything I knew was wrong?
Right? With that crime procedural, true detective, roar. And according to Kathryn Hahn, she and the show's executive producer and head writer, Jack Schaefer, took this approach very seriously.
It was important to Jack Schaefer and myself that it be as real as possible, that it really felt like a prestige true crime story. So we treated it so seriously, the stakes were really high. And there were, of course, some moments that busted through that we would just look at each other and laugh, I cannot believe we're doing this right now.
This was obviously more than a fun gimmick and callback to WandaVision. In fact, Kathryn believes in her personal character backstory that Agatha had taken on different personas prior to the detective identity for a very specific reason.
I think there was many personas she tried on to accomplish something subconsciously that she was trying to work out. That's how she tried to figure out what was happening. But it was the true crime bug that was because she spidey sensed that Wanda had died and that things were falling apart. And she felt a loosening in her grip on this reality that was not reality.
There's even a scene in the first episode where Agatha's neighbor mentions that she was recently, quote, bitten by the true crime bug.
Right. And while the first episode was sort of a misdirect, it does set up the stakes for the entire series. She doesn't have her powers anymore and she wants them back. And we also get the first kind of hints of the series antagonists, the Salem 7.
Speaking of antagonists, can we talk about the scene where Rio, played by Aubrey Plaza, licks the blood off of Agatha's hand?
It's funny because the energy in that scene, it really seems to channel what we know about these two characters, their relationship moving forward. But also, despite wanting to work together, this is the first time Kathryn Hahn and Aubrey Plaza have collaborated. So I think that energy shows up in the scene.
I mean, it was so fun to play with her. So to go toe-to-toe with her was so freaking fun. And this relationship is so dark. Like there just always felt like something in it that was like also just very compelling. And yeah, like I felt very similarly to her, that we just like to just go there to like the deepest corners, like the icky corners, and excavate a scene as deeply as possible to find all the nooks and crannies. And everybody did on this show.
Now, the second episode, that's where things really start cooking. According to Jack Schaefer, this pilot misdirect was always the plan in the original pitch.
Which essentially was like, okay, so we're going to do a pilot, but it's a misdirect. And then we're going to do the real pilot. Like that was a really big gamble. And I really appreciated that they were on board, because there's kind of a way where you're like, well, that first pilot didn't, like, that episode 1 didn't really mean anything. Of course, it's like deeply meaningful for, the person who wrote it and all of us putting it together. And it's seeded with Easter eggs, which I think that I hope that audiences will enjoy and respond to. But yeah, then episode 2, that's the true kickoff of the show.
And there are so many Easter eggs, from several Westview neighbors returning from WandaVision like Dottie Jones and Dennis the Mailman, to her pet rabbit that we all loved and were a little scared of, Senora Scratchy. Though, because of this particular setup in the beginning of the series, Jack wanted to be sure that she was the one directing these first 2 episodes.
Sort of selfishly, like I wanted to be like, okay, fake pilot, real pilot. I want to establish both. Because, in pilot directing, what you're doing is you're establishing the look and tone and vibe of the show. But episode 1 doesn't do that. Episode 2 does. So I'm like, I'll do both.
Now, if the first episode sets up the stakes for the series, the second episode is where we get the call to action for our hero, anti-hero, villain.
Let's maybe just go with Agatha. But yes, the second episode sees Agatha and Teen, played by Joe Locke, assemble a coven of witches in order to travel down the Witch's Road in order to regain, and in the case of Teen, unlock their power.
So yeah, then, Marvel is so good with the fun and with the found family and the gang coming together. And so I just really was like, this is like we're doing like a heist movie here. Like we need a potions guy, we need a divination guy, and I, in my work, I really love putting women in cinematic scenarios that sort of were formerly occupied by men. And so like to do kind of like have a heisty Dirty Dozen vibe, but in the witch space with women was just so much fun.
Well, we got to hear Kathryn Hahn and Jack Schaefer reveal some of the secrets behind Agatha All Along's premiere. We also got a chance to talk to Aubrey Plaza, including how she first met with Schaefer and what made her say yes to joining the series.
I mean, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. First of all, Kathryn Hahn, I've wanted to work with her for so long. I've been friends with her forever. So an opportunity to, get on screen with her was really, really exciting. And then I loved what they had done with WandaVision. So it was just knowing that they were kind of the brilliant minds behind that show, which I felt like was so elevated and really beautifully done. And then kind of in combination with what they told us about this show, I was like, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. I was really on board.
On top of all of that, Aubrey is no novice when it comes to the occult. In fact, she claims that it runs through her veins and has followed her throughout her entire life.
I feel that there have been many witches in my family and my family line. I've always felt that way. My mother's very witchy, and where I grew up in Delaware, there was a lot of, it's very old land there where I grew up, and there was always kind of a feeling, a sense, that there was something going on in the woods, which is where I spent most of my time. So it's been a part of my life since I was conceived. For sure. In the depths of hell.
That was just such a surprise.
Yes.
Classic Plaza, from the depths of hell.
Yeah. There's no way she didn't summon a demon, or at least try to back in the day in those woods in Delaware.
And maybe behind the scenes on the show, perhaps. Okay, and that other laughter you hear, that's from Aubrey's co-star Patti Lupone, who we spoke to at the same time. I love that you can hear Patti laughing at Aubrey's response.
Yeah, it's a real kind of like symbol of the camaraderie they must have had on set, right? You love to know that an ensemble cast really is an ensemble, like they like each other, know how to play off each other. That stuff all shows up on the camera, so it's really great to hear that kind of laughter. Patti also believes there's some witchiness in her, and even that there was a little something supernatural about being cast in Agatha All Along.
It was a complete surprise to me that I would get that phone call, and they described the character, and I thought, I mean, honest to God, for many years of my life, I believed that I do have precognisance. I am a Sicilian. I do think that I have witch qualities. I've always thought that. So when they posed a 450-year-old Sicilian witch, I went, okay, this is destiny, really. This is destiny. I'm in line with what I'm supposed to do. You don't say no to that stuff, period.
And we're joking a little bit, but yes, I'm sure that there are real connections that these actresses feel and can use for a show like Agatha All Along. And it's really exciting to kind of see those two things in conversation happening, both like on a meta, like narrative style, and within the context of their own lives. You know, it's been a little chilly in Atlanta this week. It feels like fall vibes are finally upon us.
You're in Atlanta, Creepy, and you're wearing a tank top. You are dressed for summer still. Like, what is this nonsense you're talking about fall vibes?
My cardigan is within arm's reach, I promise. It is starting to feel like fall.
I mean, sure if you say so, but next you're going to start telling me that it's time to start pre-ordering pumpkin spice stuff? Like, is that where we're going?
It's possible we decorated for Halloween a week ago.
Oh, you're a skeleton girly, aren't you? You've got one of them 12-footers outside waiting to get set up.
Yeah, our apartment complex is not into it.
Boo.
I think that we are well within our rights to start spooky season early.
Okay, this I can get on board with.
So what do you think, Evan? Is it time for us to talk about vampires? Should we tell our fine listeners about Blade?
The Daywalker. Let me grab my leather jacket, because if we're going to cosplay being cold, I'm going to throw that on and join you. Preeti, it's time to talk about Blade. Okay, so where do we start with Blade? I know we've got the sunglasses, we've got the trench coat, we've got those swords.
I think we start back at the beginning and really sink our teeth into his early history. Get it?
You were just every available obvious low-hanging fruit pun you're going to chomp right into. See, I can do it too.
So Blade is born Eric Brooks in London, 1929. His mother, Tara, seeks a doctor while she's in labor with him, and that doctor turns out to be former scientist and current bloodsucker Deacon Frost.
Deacon Frost does what vampires do best. He drinks Tara's blood while she's in labor, which kills her. But by drinking her blood, Deacon passes vampire enzymes through her bloodstream to her baby Eric. So when he's born, he's half human, half vampire.
And that is called a dampier. Basically, it means new baby Eric is impervious to vampire bites.
It also means he's super strong, his healing is accelerated, and he can move so fast, people think he's teleporting.
As he grows up, he hones these powers, along with a lifelong hatred of vampires. His driving motivation becomes vengeance against the vamp who killed his mother.
At 9 years old, he starts training with a vampire hunter named Jamal Afari. Afari teaches him about fighting and weaponry.
And jazz! He teaches him about jazz.
Listen, you gotta have some rhythm, and you gotta figure out how to improvise if you're gonna be killing vampires. So, like, I wonder what Blade's favorite John Coltrane album is. Anyway.
After this training montage, it is time to bestow our superhero name. Eric's easy mastery of knives and daggers earns him the persona we know and love and are terrified of. Blade.
Yes, I am scared of blades. That's why I don't shave my beard anymore. And we're going to call him Blade from now on, because Blade is a very cool name.
Even Blade thinks so. He once told a landlady his name was Frank Blade.
That does not sound like a fake name at all. Great job, Eric.
It's a good thing she didn't check his ID.
Blade joins a group of hunters called the Blood Shadows. Before long, he gets into a fight with their leader, kills him, and starts dating the guy's girlfriend, Glory.
That is messed up. Not a good look. And that honeymoon does not last long. After a few months, the group encounters a really powerful vampire who bites Glory.
Glory, now a vampire, has the chance to murder Blade. She spares his life and disappears.
Into the night?
Well, yeah, she can't be in sunlight, so yes, let's go with your suggestion, Preeti. She disappears into the night. She also tells Blade if he looks for her, she'll kill him.
And the bad luck continues. His mentor Afari gets turned by Dracula. I mean, you knew Dracula had to show up in a story about vampires, right?
I love that Dracula exists in the Marvel Universe. You know, they're like, yeah, we have Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, science-based heroes, and now Lord of the Undead.
And he's awesome. I mean, he's awful, but he's awesome. And so he has to exist in the Marvel Universe. If we're going to talk about vampires, you gotta bring Dracula into it.
Of course. So, Afari gets turned. Blade kills Afari so he won't be doomed to exist as a vampire. And so begins a long-standing feud between Blade and Dracula.
Blade has quite a few notable battles with big bads, including one scuffle with a former ally of his called Morbius, the living vampire. Morbius is a unique kind of vampire who turned himself by accident in a failed experiment using vampire bat blood.
In the fight, Morbius bites Blade. Normally, that's not a big deal for Blade, except those enzymes in his blood can't protect him from Morbius's special science vampire brand of bite. And that bite gives him fangs and a thirst for human blood. Yes, Blade finally becomes a full-blown vampire.
Oh, that sucks for Blade.
Yeah, keep laughing. Sure. Enjoy it. Soak it up. I hope you're proud of yourself. But on the real, it does suck for Blade because he's become the very thing he hates the most, right? He's got to balance his desire to be a good guy with the newfound urge to drink blood. Plus, it's not easy to conceal fangs, duh. But he does get something out of those half-vampire enzymes though. He becomes a daywalker, basically a vampire who isn't vulnerable to sunlight.
So over the years, Blade joins a few different teams, including one group of vampire hunters with some very familiar names. There's Quincy Harker and Rachel Van Helsing, descendants of two famous characters from Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, plus Frank Drake, Dracula's last mortal descendant.
He's also helped some of our favorite Marvel heroes with their pesky vampire problems. He's teamed up with Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, Ghost Rider, Doctor Strange, and a whole bunch of folks, really.
He's been a part of a group of supernatural protectors called the Midnight Suns, a member of the Avengers, and he's even worked with the X-Men. Plus, he knows Wolverine from way back. In fact, Wolverine is the one who gave him his famous leather jacket. But
he's not always in his signature duster. He went undercover as an adventurer called Spider Hero to join the Mighty Avengers back in 2013, and he wore a pink and green Halloween spider costume. Listen, trust me. Open up your search bars, go to Google, check out this look. It's a wild one.
So it's safe to say Blade is a lot more than leather and steel, or if you're reading his earliest comics from the 70s, wooden knives.
Don't you mean wooden stakes to kill vampires?
Yeah, it makes for some high stakes drama.
I'm really mad that you set me up for that.
So now that we have a general sense of who Blade is, let's talk more about his recent comic book appearances.
Well, recently he was a member of the Avengers, but then, during the events of Blood Hunt, Blade was possessed by the vampire god Varney. He then goes on to lead a faction of vampires called the Blood Coven against the Avengers. He bites and turns heroes like Miles Morales and Black Panther into vampires themselves. And oh yeah, we learned that he had a daughter named Brielle who follows in his footsteps under the code name Bloodline.
Yeesh. Man, with all of that, like, what's next for Blade? Like, if someone wants to know more about him, where should they go?
What a great question, Preeti. And I have the perfect answer for you. There's actually a new series set to release next month titled Blade Red Band. I got a chance to talk to the author of the series, Bryan Edward Hill. Along with being a writer, Bryan's also a screenwriter, filmmaker, musician, comic book writer, and graphic designer. He's written for series like Killmonger, Ultimate Black Panther, and Blade. Let's dive into our interview with Bryan. Bryan, the first thing I want to ask you was, what is it about Blade that appeals to you? Like, what's his mystique? What part of his character do you feel like you can really tap into effectively?
Oh, it's a good question, Evan. Well, first, thanks for having me here. When I think about working for Marvel in particular, so much of the characters have been kind of fully rendered, fleshed out. Like there's so much continuity there. And I think for me as a creative, it's always about where do I feel like there's undiscovered country? Where do I feel like I can add something? I really don't like to work on something unless I feel like I might be the best person to work on it at the time. And so I'll be honest, my introduction to Blade was from the Norrington film back in the 90s. I'm also a filmmaker, so cinema is really important to me. And I was just really struck by that. I just thought it was really cool. And from there, I looked at like the rest of it and got up to speed on the character. And so what I like about him is he's not mired in the extra ramifications of the normal kind of sci-fi action track of the Marvel universe. Like he works in the occult. He's got the horror touch in there. And horror is a really important genre to me. My first film that I just finished is a horror movie. So that combination of kinetic storytelling, a character that has, I think, a lot of space for not only character development, but world building around that character, combined with being able to do genuine moments of horror, like visceral storytelling. That's what made it really interesting to me, and that's what made me think I'd be a good fit for this.
Yeah, the thing about Blade is that he's an outlier, right? And whenever he shows up on the scene, there's this element of, oh, wait, there's an extra dimension to the proceedings that we had anticipated. And it feels like all of that was part of what made him a good central character in Blood Hunt. Can you talk more about where he is after the events of Blood Hunt and where his mind state is, like what his relationship to the rest of the world is right now? Talk about where we find him at the beginning of your series.
Well, for Blade, Blood Hunt was the absolute removal of his agency. He was possessed by a vampire lord, basically, Varney, vampire god, that used him to commit acts of violence against people that he would consider friends and allies. And that has been resolved. He is no longer indwelt by Varney, but he still has all the memories of everything that happened. And he has a feeling of responsibility over the things that have happened. And I think there's justified judgment against him. And he's not a character that's experienced that quite often. I mean, Blade is very aware of himself and physicality, right? He's got urges that he keeps under control. He's like a master combatant. He's used to violence. He's not a guy that thinks a lot about the possibility of losing agency, right? That doesn't happen to him often. So I felt that he would be wrestling with that in his own way. That's kind of a traumatizing event to go through. But he's not going to react to that the same way that the average person would react to that. Instead, he's going to have to kind of be extra Blade to get back to baseline. When we meet him, he's in self-imposed isolation. He is kind of trying to find his balance. But when he's brought a situation where there's, a bad monster doing bad things, but he's brought to it by these nefarious forces, for him, it's really a place to put this energy, this anger. And so that's kind of where we find him at the beginning of the story. He's really like looking for something to punish to make him feel better about the things that he did inadvertently while he was being, possessed by Varney.
You mentioned Blade's self-awareness and self-control. And one thing you said that I want to follow up on was this idea of him needing to be extra Blade. What does it mean for him to dig deep inside of himself?
Well, if I'm going to be brutally reductive, I think there are possibly two ways we respond to a lack of agency, right? Sometimes we turtle up and we get smaller in the face of that, and we have to figure out how to rejoin things. And then sometimes we like to leap into the center of madness and almost get into like a primal state of proactivity to carry us through. I'm more of the second than the former. So a lot of what I see in the character is a lot of what I see in myself. I respond to setbacks, adversity with fury, basically. And so that's where I think, Blade is. And there's also the Japanese concept of ikigai, of finding your place in the world. And I know within the comics themselves, the Hagakure influence hasn't been as strong as it is in the films, right? The Hagakure is a feudal era book of samurai wisdom, basically. And I read that growing up, again, trying to figure out how to manage myself through the world. I've been an outsider most of my life. I feel like I've been underestimated most of my life. I feel like I built a career despite what people expected me to be able to do. And I always feel like the next thing I want to do is another thing people don't think I can do. So no one thought I could write and direct a movie. I did. And for me, it's always a war. So the Hagakure is one way. There are many, many others, but the Hagakure is one way that you can explore a philosophy to help you fight the battles that Ikigai leads you to know that you need to fight. See how they work in concert, right? I'm putting them all together now in my TED Talk. So that's the Hagakure. But I do think that's somewhat woven into the character. Think about the character in detail. The guy has a katana, right? So there's a reason he gravitates towards aspects of the Hagakure. The Hagakure tells you that the first and foremost goal of a samurai is to be prepared to die, which speaks to me about the necessity to get back on the battlefield.
Right.
And so that's where I think the character is, and that's what I relate to, and that's sort of how I'm writing him coming out of this big event.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the Hagakure and the other kind of Japanese cultural influences. There's a few scenes in issue 1 where Blade is very much seemingly operating off those principles. What is about him that you feel like as a character allows him to move through different kind of cultural modalities, right? He's a vampire and he's kind of a man without a country. What is it about him that you feel like allows him to be put in these different cultural contexts so easily?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, look, I'm not a political writer, really. I'm an ethical and philosophical writer for the most part. But there is, maybe you can relate to this, there's an aspect of being Black in the world where you're oftentimes unmoored from legacies. You're oftentimes always, maybe you're a valued stranger. Sometimes you're a disposable stranger. And I think that allows us to explore other systems, not from a cultural racial identity point of view, but more from I need a methodology to manage the world around me point of view. But I think the martial stoicism for him seemed like a way to deal with a life and an afterlife, if you will, that is going to largely be about repression, being considered dangerous, maybe even being dangerous, being an outsider. Unlike a lot of Marvel characters, heroism is not in the gravity of what Blade is.
Yeah.
Right? He's not Peter Parker. He's not Tony Stark. His heroism is a byproduct of him, again, finding that ikigai, right? Saying, what am I going to do with what I am?
Yeah.
And I don't see Blade as exclusively samurai derived. In the beginning of this book, he's in Southeast Asia, right? We're closer to the equator, right? So we're in different cultures there. And I think he's also aware of African cultures. I think he's also aware of other things. But, in a lot of ways, when you are a dangerous and righteous person, in a way, you're a threat to the world.
Yeah. So you talked about this new evil. Can you talk about the threat that Blade is going to be facing, how he becomes aware of it, and, if there are any kind of bigger ramifications for the Marvel Comics universe writ large?
Well, yeah. Look, there's only so many times we can do a story about, a vampire is just doing normal vampire stuff, and then Blade goes in and stops him, right? And I often think about mythology, classic literature, like what I can use to inspire form here, but explore in my own kind of Marvel Comics way. And one of the works that's really important to me is Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Mm. The idea of someone essentially setting them up as a demigod, as a deity of sorts, and building their own sycophants, really to buttress their power, their twisted sense of the world. And here we have this idea that even among magicians, there is magic that should not be used. And our vampire is seeking that for his own gain, for his own control, kind of building his own cult under the auspices of like a dark humanitarian movement. And so it's not simply just like evil vampire guy and skyscraper go fight. It's more, Blade kind of taking on like a despot tyrant, if you will, who's upsetting the balance. And so the balance of the supernatural forces of the Marvel Universe is usually a thematic in these things I'm writing when I'm on the spookier side. And I see Blade as a character of balance, half vampire, half man, right? So in a way, he's like this philosophical opposite that sort of sits at this fulcrum, and I do see him as kind of a character that is there to make sure these things never get too far. So that's what he's up against. I mean, basically Blade is going, upriver, in quotes, in a war-torn country to go take out a vampire lord dictator who thinks he might become a god.
You can check out Blade Red Band in comic stores or wherever you read your Marvel comics. Bryan, awesome to talk to you again. Take care. Thanks so much for coming to the show today.
Appreciate you guys, as always.
Watching the first 2 episodes of Agatha All Along really got me thinking about Agatha's character in WandaVision. Like, okay, she kidnaps kids and kills a puppy, but she does it all in search of answers, or, depending who you ask, power. In WandaVision's 8th episode, Agatha takes Wanda on a journey through her memories, trying to understand Wanda's past and where her powers came from. And this moment in the series is really striking because even though Wanda is basically a hostage, Agatha still takes this kind of maternal, gentle tone with her. Throughout the series, Wanda goes to spectacular lengths to avoid dealing with her trauma, and Agatha, even with not so noble intentions, shows her how valuable it is to face your history.
I don't want to go back there.
I know you don't. But it's good medicine, Angel. The only way forward is back.
Now, whether Agatha is ready to go back and face her history is another story. While we wait to find out where Agatha's journey takes her, you can watch all of WandaVision now on Disney+.
Next week on the Official Marvel Podcast, we continue answering your biggest questions as we react to Episode 3 of Agatha All Along with Sashir Zamata, Deborah Jo Rupp, and Aliyah.
She kind of got ousted from the witch community. Her power literally got taken from her, and it feels so betraying and lonely. And so I think she got used to being on her own.
In the meantime, let us know your questions by leaving a comment and or review wherever you're listening to this. We might answer it next week. But that's it for today. This episode was hosted by Evan Narciss and myself, Preeti Chibber.
Our producer is Jasmine Estrada,
with help from Senior Manager of Audio Production and Development, Brad Barton, and Production Manager, Emily Godfrey.
Mixed by Zachary Goldberg.
Theme music by Ida Akbal.
Executive producers are Larissa Rosen and Jesse Berger.
All right, buds. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week for another Scream-tastic adventure.
All right, thanks, y'all. Bye.